All right, let's look at verses 4-7. Though I might also have confidence in the flesh, if any other man thinketh that he had whereof he might trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, and Hebrew of the Hebrews, as touching the law, a Pharisee, concerning zeal persecuting the church, touching the righteousness that which is in the law. But what things were gained to me, those I counted loss for Christ. Here Paul gives his credentials, not to boast, but to show that he had enjoyed every privilege which a Jew could enjoy, and had risen to every attainment to which a Jew could rise. He knew what it was to be a Jew in the highest sense of the term, and had deliberately abandoned it all for the sake of Jesus Christ. Look at the 7 things he lists, his 7 credentials here. He says, number 1, circumcised the 8th day. He was circumcised when he was 8 days old. It was the commandment of God to Abraham. He that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you. Genesis 17:12. And that commandment had been repeated as a permanent law of Israel in Leviticus 12:3. By this claim, Paul makes it clear that he is not an Ishmaelite, for the Ishmaelites were circumcised in their 13th year, found in Genesis 17:25. Nor was he a proselyte, who had come late into the Jewish faith and had been circumcised in manhood. He stresses the fact that he had been born into the Jewish faith and had known its privileges and observed its ceremonies since birth. All right. Number 2, of the stock of Israel. When the Jews wanted to stress their special relationship to God in its most unique sense, it was the word Israelite that they used. Israel was the name which had been specifically given to Jacob by God after his wrestling with the angel. It was to Israel that they, in the most special sense, traced their heritage. In fact, the Ishmaelites could trace their descent to Abraham, for Ishmael was Abraham's son by Hagar. The Edomites could trace their descent to Isaac, for Esau, the founder of the Edomite nation, was Isaac's son. But it was the Israelites alone who could trace their descent to Jacob, whom God had called by the name of Israel. And so by calling himself an Israelite, Paul stressed the absolute purity of his descent. All right. The 3rd thing he says here, of the tribe of Benjamin. Not only was Paul an Israelite, he also belonged to the elite of Israel. The tribe of Benjamin had a special place in Israel. Benjamin was the child of Rachel, the well-loved wife of Jacob, and of all the 12 patriarchs, he alone had been born in the promised land. It was from the tribe of Benjamin that the first king of Israel had come, and there was no doubt that from that very king that Paul had been given his original name of Saul. When under Rehoboam, the kingdom had been split up. 10 of the tribes went off with Jeroboam, and Benjamin was the only tribe which remained faithful with the tribe of Judah. When they returned from the exile, it was from the tribes of Benjamin and Judah that the nucleus of the reborn nation was formed. And that's found in the book of Ezra, chapter 4 and verse 1. The tribe of Benjamin had the place of honor in Israel's battle line, so that the battle cry of Israel was, "After thee, O Benjamin." The great feast commemorated the deliverance of which the book of Esther tells, and the central figure of that story was Mordecai, a Benjamite. When Paul stated that he was of the tribe of Benjamin, it was a claim that he was not simply an Israelite, but that he belonged to the highest part of, or the highest status of Israel. Number 4, an Hebrew of the Hebrews. The history of the Jews had dispersed them all over the world. In every town and in every city and in every country there were Jews. There were tens of thousands of them in Rome, and in Alexandria there were more than 1 million. They stubbornly refused to be assimilated to the nations amongst whom they lived. They retained faithfully their own religion and their own customs and their own laws. But it frequently happened that they forgot their own language. They became Greek-speaking of necessity because they lived and moved in a Greek environment. A Hebrew was a Jew who was not only of pure racial descent, but who had deliberately and often laboriously retained the Hebrew tongue. Such a Jew would speak the language of the country in which he lived, but also the Hebrew, which was his ancestral language. Paul claims not only to be a pure-blooded Jew, but one who still spoke Hebrew. He had been born in the Gentile city of Tarsus, but he had come to Jerusalem to be educated at the feet of Gamaliel, and was able, for instance, when the time came, to speak to the mob in Jerusalem in their own tongue. All right, the fifth thing he says, as touching the law, a Pharisee. As far as the law went, Paul was a trained Pharisee. This is a claim that Paul makes more than once. There were not very many Pharisees, never more than 6,000, but they were the spiritual athletes of Judaism. Their very name means the separated ones. They had separated themselves off from all common life and from lives to keep every smallest detail of the law. Paul claims that not only was he a Jew who had retained his ancestral religion, but he had also devoted his whole life to its most rigorous observance. No man knew better from personal experience what Jewish religion was at its highest than Paul. Then he said concerning zeal persecuting the church. As far as zeal went, Paul had been a persecutor of the church. To a Jew, zeal was the greatest quality in the religious life. And we see this very clearly. Hyenas had saved the people from the wrath of God and had been given an everlasting priesthood because he was zealous for his God. In Numbers chapter 25, verses 11 through 13, it is the cry of the psalmist in Psalm 69:6, zeal for thy house has consumed me. A burning zeal for God was the hallmark of Jewish religion. Paul had been so zealous a Jew that he had tried to wipe out the opponents of Judaism. That was a thing which he never forgot. Again and again he speaks of it. He was never ashamed to confess his shame and to tell men that once he had hated the Christian life, the Christ whom now he loved, and sought to destroy the church which now he served. It is Paul's claim that he knew Judaism at its most intense. The other Pharisees were willing to relax when they had run the Christians out of Jerusalem, but Paul was determined to wipe them out all over the world. That was his purpose on his way to Damascus before being stopped by Jesus Christ himself. And number 7, touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless. Paul claims that there was no demand of the law which he did not fulfill. As for the righteousness which the law could produce, he was blameless. So we see here in this passage, Paul stating his attainments. He was so loyal a Jew that he had never lost the Hebrew speech. He was not only a religious Jew, he was a member of their strictest and most self-disciplined sect. He had in his heart a burning zeal for what he had thought was the cause of God. And he had a record in Judaism in which no man could mark a fault. Paul thought that all of his accomplishments were something special until he met Jesus Christ. And when he met Jesus, he wrote his accomplishments off as nothing. He stripped himself of every human claim of honor that he might accept in complete humility the mercy of God in Jesus Christ. So Paul proves here he had the right to speak. He was not condemning Judaism from the outside looking in. He had experienced it at its highest point, and he knew that it was nothing compared with the joy which Christ had given him. He knew that the only way to peace was to abandon the way of human achievement and to accept the way of grace. Declaring